Hello, and welcome to the Customer Demo SSE Plus course for Symantec Web Gateway version 5. My name is Kevin Kingston, and I'm a Technical Field Enablement Manager for Symantec's messaging and web security products. Today we will focus on delivering a customer demo for Symantec Web Gateway version 5. This training course provides technical audiences a demonstration of specific features and functionality for this product, as they would be performed for a customer. Upon completion of this course, you will be better prepared to use demo tips, best practices, and execute a customer demo. By the end of this training, you should be able to effectively deliver a customer demonstration to a customer, demonstrate specific product features and functionality, provide demonstration tips and best practices, know where to look for additional information and next steps. So now let's get started with the demo. Right, so you can see I have my demo environment up and running here now. So the first thing to point out is that I'm running the Web Gateway version 5 in VMware. I'm currently using the beta version because the production version isn't out yet. And one thing to point out is that I have the 3 images inside a VMware team. So I use a VMware team because there's some tricky networking we need to do to get the products to run the way we want them to in VMware. I have all of this documented in my VMware Environment Setup Guide. So that's the document you want to look at if you need some help setting up this environment. But basically the environment comprises of 3 images. So the first image is my VM, EV, SBG, Mail 32 server. And this is basically the mail server in my environment. It's also the Active Directory in the environment. And the Web Gateway actually also uses this server for DNS in the environment. The second machine I have is just a Windows XP client. I use the Windows XP client mainly for client-side testing through the Web Gateway, so we'll be using this machine quite a bit to test out our policies, etc. This is an XP client attached to my example.com domain, which again is the domain running on my Active Directory server we just spoke about a minute ago. And then the third image we have in the environment is the Web Gateway version 5 beta. So you can see it's just a Linux appliance, and we don't really need to do anything on this image itself. We're just mainly connecting to it and through it while we do our testing. Okay, so now I'm just going to open up a web browser from my host machine. And we're going to connect to my web gateway. The IP address of the web gateway in the environment is 169.254.64.45. Okay, and I'm going to log in with my username admin and my password. I click the login button. And now we can see this is the executive summary, which is what we see when we first log into the Web Gateway. Because I don't really have any reporting information in here, I won't really go into reporting with the customer at the moment. But what customers mainly want to see, or what I find they want to see, is they want to get an idea on what the Web Gateway can actually do. So normally the first thing I'm going to do with the customer is actually look at policy configuration, and then we can start testing the policies we actually have configured. So even before looking at the policy configuration, there's a couple of things I just want to point out about the environment. So one thing I have done in the environment, or the thing I want to show, is if I go to my administration configuration page, you can see I'm actually running the appliance. If I go to the operating mode, you can see I'm running the appliance in inline proxy mode. And the reason I run in inline proxy mode is because when running in this mode, we can pretty much demonstrate all of the functionality and features of the customer. If the customer is interested in doing an inline installation, then that's fine. We can easily test how things look inline when we're in inline proxy mode. But if the customer also wants to get an idea of what it's like to run the appliance in standalone proxy mode, then we can still do that. We just don't use the inline feature. We send the traffic through the proxy. So by running in this mode, we can really test or we can really use this mode to test all of the functionality, and we can really tailor the demonstration based on the customer's needs. But again, by running in this mode, we can sort of get the best of both worlds. Or of course, there is the option to run inline proxy as well, and some customers are going to want to run in that mode. The next thing I wanted to point out is that I've actually configured the web gateway to integrate with my Active Directory. So if I go to the Authentication tab, you can see these settings are actually filled in, and I'm using the domain controller interface method to integrate with Active Directory. So this is pretty easy and straightforward to set up. I quite like using DC interface to display Active Directory integration. I think it's probably the easiest method to set up Active Directory integration. It's my preferred method. But if you know going into a demo that a customer isn't willing to use DC interface, then you might want to look at demoing the NTLM authentication instead of DC interface. But for my demo, I'm going to be using DC interface today. So now we're going to go to the policies configuration page. And on the policies configuration page, you can see I have my default all policy. So this is a default policy that I've created for the demo. And what I'll normally do is I'll just open this policy up just to go through it and show a customer what it looks like. So to edit the policy, we click on the pencil. And then we see all the policy configuration options. So one of the first things I'll point out is we can see my policy is applied to all computers in the environment. And then we start to see the different types of protection provided and the action to be taken. So I'm just going to slowly drag down the list here. And one thing I always point out to customers, here we see the file and active content detection. And basically this is the scanning of uploads and downloads of files using the Symantec antivirus engine. And we can see by default my action is currently set to block. Below here we see my spyware categories. So the web gateway has a bunch of different spyware signatures. All the signatures are given a spyware severity. They're also assigned a detection type. And then there are the individual spyware categories as well. By default, you can see everything is set to use default. And then down below here we can see spyware default is actually set to block. So any traffic matching our spyware signatures by default in my policy will be set to block. If we drag down a bit lower, we can start to see the application control categories. So you can browse over these with the customer, the different categories and subcategories we have. You can see common protocols is looking for HTTPS, SSL, or TLS traffic. It's currently set to allow. We can see some database applications. I'll just browse through this list. One thing I've actually done for my default policy, you can see under file transfers and logs, I've actually set FTP traffic to block. This is just for the testing we're going to do. You can then see there's some gaming signatures. Some customers are interested in that. We've got our instant messaging signatures. You can see our network utilities. Another one customers have a big interest in is peer-to-peer applications. So they're currently set to allow, but it's definitely a category a lot of customers set to monitor or at least block. You can see some remote access, some streaming media, and then some voice over IP protocols. So that's the application control module. If we drag down further on the list, we can see our URL filtering module. And the first thing you'll actually see at the top of the URL filtering module is this allow after hours configuration. And this gives the administrators, if I check the box, gives the administrators to define any non-working days in the environment. So you can see they've Saturday, Sunday checked by default. And then I can define when my after hours starts and when my after hours ends. So by default, after 5 p.m. after hours starts, and then after hours ends at 9 a.m. every morning. And then what I can do on the right hand side of the page here, I can actually apply a different policy to apply after hours, so I may be more relaxed about the sites my users can access during the after hours periods. I'm actually going to disable that. I just wanted to show you that it is possible. And now I'm just going to bring you through the different lists we have. You can see the multiple categories list here. So with my site's been categorized in different categories, if one of the categories is set to allow, but another category is set to block, you can see my block will actually take precedence. So that's the default setting. And now just to quickly go through some of my content filtering categories, you can see I've got criminal activities, drugs, and I'll just slowly scroll through some of these. There are some gaming sites. You can see some IT sites. Anonymous proxies is one type of category a lot of customers inquire about. They don't want their end users using anonymous proxies to bypass the web solution. You can see job search, pornography. Under social networking, you can see we've actually divided social networking into business networking and then social networking. I've actually set these to block in my policy, but some administrators might like to block social networking, which would be classified as Facebook, where they might like to allow business networking sites, which would be something like LinkedIn. And you can see some spam sites, some vehicle sites, weapons. Anything that isn't classified in a category goes into our unclassified category. And by default, that's set to allow, which means we're not even logging the unclassified sites that users are actually trying to access. So I'll just click Save. So that kind of shows you a default policy and the policy configuration available. One thing I'll probably do now is go to my client machine so we can test out some of these rules that we just looked at. Okay, so now we're going to flip over to my XP client. And so again, the web gateway is deployed in this environment so that all traffic from my XP client or even my Active Directory server, at the moment with the web gateway inline, all traffic from these two computers is actually passing through the web gateway on its way to the internet. So the web gateway is really seeing all the traffic coming in and out of the environment destined for these two machines, which are the only two machines in my environment. So what I'll probably do just to test first is we'll probably take a look at the AV scanning and what actually happens when we try to download a virus. So I'm going to open up Internet Explorer. And we actually have a test page we can use. It's testwebgateway.com/test. I've created a little shortcut here. But what we can do from this test page is test some of the web gateway functionality. And what we're going to test at the moment is actually testing downloading iCar through the web gateway. So I click the link. And now you can see here I get my end user, or at least what we're simulating the end user at the moment, receives a block page from the web gateway that says downloading of the file is prohibited. The file icar.com contains viruses and violates company policy. So now we're just going to look at this in the reports. So if I go back to my web gateway, if I come into under reports, you can see custom reports. Now this is almost like a real-time log file in the web gateway. So if I come into custom reports, we can see here my latest activity, and we can see client. So this is the host name of my machine, is client.example.com. You can see my user who's actually logged in, Daniel.Turner. And again, this is because I've set up domain controller interface and configured it in the environment. That's why we're able to see my end user, and this department is actually his organizational unit he belongs to. And then we can see the detection name that fired in this case was iCar test string, and it's determined to be a virus. And we can see the action taken was to block it. I like to show a bit more detail in my report, so what we can actually do is come up to our change columns. And now I'm going to check a few more columns here. Ones that I like to add are the policy, so it's going to show me which policy actually was fired in this instance, and then also this full URL or file name. And now I'm going to hit the save settings. Now when we see the report, you can see the new fields. So the first one is my policy field, and we can see the default all policy applied in this instance. And if I drag over the right here, we can also see the file that we tried to actually download. So testwebgateway.com/test. You can see the file name was icar.com. I'm going to switch back to my XP client. And now what we're going to do, I'm going to go to a new URL. I'm just going to go to Google. But now what we're going to do is actually try and download a file through the web gateway. So I'm going to go to download PuTTY. I'm going to Google that. And I click a link to get access to PuTTY download page. And we can see here I've got putty.exe. If I actually click the executable, now it all happens really fast because it's such a small file, but as you can see here, what a normal end user would see if the file was any bigger, you'd actually see the patients page and the bar would come across the page. And what's really happening here is that the web gateway is displaying this patients page to the end user while it actually downloads and scans the file. Once it downloads and scans the file and it realizes it's threat-free, then it gives the end user a link to actually download the file. And you download the file then directly from the web gateway. So I'm going to click here to download the file. I'm going to save it to my desktop. So now it's successfully downloaded the file from the internet. I'm going to go back to my reports on the web gateway and my custom reports. And now in my latest activity, you can see my client again. And we can see here, this time we can see a file in motion. So I've actually downloaded a file. The action was just monitored. We can see the name of the file that I actually tried to download. But again, we can see it was my default all policy that fired. So this is what we'd see in the instance when we're downloading a clean, just a clean regular file. Now I think what we'll do is we'll test out some of the application control functionality. So I'm going to come back to my client machine. I'm going to close Internet Explorer. This time I'm actually going to use my FTP client. If you remember when we were looking at my policy, I had set FTP to block. So now what's going to happen if I try and get an FTP connection to the internet? It's going to try and connect to ftp.symantec.com, and I'm going to click the Quick Connect button. You can see here my FTP client's trying to make a connection, but it's getting errors that it can't connect to the server. I'm going to close that down. Let's go back into my custom reports. Just click it again to refresh it. And now again we can see my client machine and my user. We can see the default all policy still applying. But we can see detection name FTP is fired, the action was block, and we can see my my client machine tried to make the FTP connection, but it was blocked. Now what we're going to do is we're going to test out some URL filtering. So I'm going to come back to my client machine, and we're going to open up Internet Explorer. But let's try to browse to some sites we're not allowed to go to. So one of the sites we actually saw was Facebook.com. We had blocked the entire social network category. So let's try and access Facebook. And we can see my Facebook block page. So when URL filtering rules fire, you can see here it tells you you're not allowed to access the website. And it says URL www.facebook.com is a known social networking location and violates company policy. And let's go back to the custom reports on my web gateway again. And with URL filtering, you don't see a detection name, but it starts to show me the category and class of the site. We can see the action was to block it, the default all policy applied, and you can see the URL I was actually trying to access. So one thing about the block page that we actually see, you can see the block page here, these can be customizable by the customer. We're going to go back into my policy. If I go into policies configuration, and we edit the policy, you can actually see this block message page group. Oops. This block message page group, and it says to use the default block pages. So if I come down to my interface, you can see under administration we have this end user pages. And the end user pages are the default block pages. And here we can customize the text on these block pages. You can also add a new image. If we don't want to use the Symantec Web Gateway image, a customer can actually import their own image, so they can see their own logo instead of the Symantec logo when the block page appears. You can also create different sets of block pages that you could apply to different group policies then. So for example, for all my English users, I could have I could use my default message group, which is in English by default, but I could come in and create a new message group and set that to be my Italian group, and then I could actually set the language to Italian. You can see we've actually customized these block message examples. We've actually translated them into quite a few different languages, you can see from the list. And after I've selected Italian, you can see it's actually translated to the different languages. And then I could call my new message group Italian, and then I could save this. And now when I create a new group policy, I'd have the option to choose the Italian group as my end user pages to use for that policy. I think what we're going to do now is go back into my policies configuration. We're going to create a new group policy. So I've got my default policy which will apply to everyone, but let's create a new group policy to apply to a certain group in my environment. So I'm going to say create a new policy. I'm going to call this policy my American sales policy. Here's my block message page group, so if I actually drop down you can see I can use the default or the Italian group I just created. Let's leave the default. Now who my policy applies to, my initial policy was set to apply to all computers. This time I'm going to choose the specific workgroups option. And for workgroup type, you can actually see the different types I can create policies with. So I can do it by subnet, IP range, VLAN ID, and then if integrated with Active Directory like we are, we can use some LDAP groups. So I'm going to create a policy based on my LDAP organizational unit. And the OU I'm going to base this group on is my American sales group. And that's who this policy is going to apply to. I'm going to leave the file and active content detection the same, but this time what I'm going to do is, let's just drag down here. For files, transfers, and logs, let's hit the details all to expand out all of the application control categories. And for file, transfer, and logs, I'm going to leave FTP, I'm going to set it to actually monitor. So my original policy was set to block. Now we're actually going to set it to monitor. For some of my other sites, or those are my applications. And if we come into my URL filtering now, let's go down to my social networking. And this time we're going to leave my social networking set to monitor. Actually, what we'll do is we'll set business networking to block, but we'll allow or we'll only monitor social networking. So let's go back up to the top, and we're going to save our new policy. So again, this new policy is only going to be applied to the American sales workgroup. I'm going to save that. So now that I've actually made policy changes, I need to save and activate my changes. One thing, before you actually save and activate your changes, you want to make sure your new policy is in the correct position. So the way policies get applied are from the top down. So the way things are at the moment is the way I would actually want things. If my default policy, if I actually raise that above, if my default policy was actually higher in precedence than this policy I just created, the American sales policy would never actually get applied, because my default policy is set to apply to all computers in the environment. So if it were higher in precedence than the American sales policy, this policy would never apply. So what we want to make sure is that the American sales policy is above the default policy. Then we're going to save and activate my changes. Okay, that looks fine. And now what we should actually see, if we go back to my client machine, and I just close the browser, and we're going to open it again, and I'm going to go to www.facebook.com, and now I can actually access the page. What if we go to www.linkedin.com? So unfortunately, we had allowed social networking, but we had still blocked the business networking. So you can see LinkedIn, because it's a known business networking location, we still can't get access to the site. Let's go back to the Web Gateway reports and the custom reports. And again, this time we can actually see here, I guess my last activity, you can see my client machine, my user. Again, we can see the organization Unity belonged to. He was part of the American sales group. This time we can see he tried to access the social media site, and we can see it was www.facebook.com. However, this time it was allowed, and we can see now that a different policy is being applied to this user. The American sales policy is being applied instead of the default all policy, which was originally being applied. Even so, we can see I still don't have access to my business networking sites, because we had set that to still be blocked in my new policy. The other change we made in the policy was in application control to my FTP access. Let's go back to my client machine. And this time what we're going to do is we're going to open up my FTP client again. And we're going to try to access that same site, ftp.symantec.com. And now I'm going to click the Quick Connect button. This time you can see I'm actually able to make an FTP connection. Just going to go into one of these folders. I'm also going to download a file. As you can see, let's just download this sequence file. I'll download that at the desktop. And the file is transferred. I'm going to close my FTP client. You can see it here on my desktop, current.sqn. Let's go back to the Web Gateway reports, custom reports. And here we can see now we can see another file in motion. And we can actually see that the Web Gateway actually downloaded and scanned the current.cqn file, and it was determined to be clean. I was allowed to download the file. So that was the file scan, but then just below it as well we can also see the FTP connection which was made, and we can see this time we're actually only monitoring the FTP application instead of blocking it like we were originally. Okay, so now we're going to go back to our client machine, and this time what we're going to actually do is log off the client machine. So we're currently logged in as Daniel Turner. We're actually going to log off and log in with a new user. And this time I'm going to end up logging in with our user Mike.Smith and put in his password, SimC for now, and click OK. So now what should be happening is we should now not be applying the American sales policy, because Mike.Smith isn't actually in that group. So we should be applying the default all policy again. So let's just come over and we're going to browse somewhere. And I think what I'll actually do is go to my testwebgateway.com site again. So I'll go to testwebgateway.com/test. And now if I check my custom reports, we can see this time we can see the login name is Mike.Smith, and he's part of the EMEA VIP organizational unit. And again, the reason why the web gateway can identify which user is actually logged in is because I've installed the domain controller interface agent onto my Active Directory domain controller. This agent monitors the security event logs on the domain controller. So when new users log in, it reports to the web gateway the username and the IP address any new user has logged into, and that's how we're able to identify who's logged in where. So for customers who don't want to use the domain controller interface agent, I mentioned earlier there is also the second option to use NTLM authentication, but my preference, particularly for demoing to customers, is just to use DC interface. It's just a bit easier. So I'm going to go back to my client machine, and there's a few other test links we can actually use from the testwebgateway.com/test page. Let's just go back. So the blacklist test actually simulates that I'm trying to connect to an IP address or bad site that's blocked by the web gateway. And when I try to access the blacklist test, you can see the web gateway actually blocks that as well. If I go back to the page again, another test is the infection detection test. You can see here it says successful test displays an error page. So when I click this link, you can see I'm not able to actually get to the page. It tries to connect to this phtest.htm page. What this is basically simulating is a client machine inside my network is trying to phone home somewhere on the internet. And the web gateway has a signature written that if anyone tries to access this page, then it would treat that machine as an infected client on the network. So if I go to my reports and come into my custom reports, you can actually see me trying to access or using these testing pages. Here was the blacklist page, the Symantec testing page, and then we can also see the Symantec phone home. And because of the phone home, if I actually check one of my reports, you can see it's called the Infected Clients Report. And this report will report any client machines that the web gateway is deemed to be infected on the network. So we can see here when we look at my infected clients report, you can see we have one active infected client, and now it's listing my machine as an infected client on the network. So what I might do now is just show you some of the other reports that are available. We've already looked at the executive summary quite a few times. And on the executive summary, we can see the current license status. You can see the appliance status, the operating mode we're currently in, whether I have any updates, and also the latest software version. As we drag down, we can start to see how much raw traffic my web gateway has processed. You can see it's processed over 50 gigabytes. You can see the number of URLs it's actually inspected. You can see how many files have been downloaded through my web gateway. Tells me if there's anything unsaved. Gives me a complete breakdown in terms of statistics of what's been happening in the environment. You can see here we've seen one phone home detection and actually blocked it, and we've identified that machine as an affected client, and I'm monitoring 3 machines inside my network. In the bottom left hand corner I see the web destinations, just a summary, and I can see sort of the top 3 categories and then types of sites my users have been trying to access, and then on the right hand side we can see any active infected clients in the network, and it shows the one infected client we currently have. On the enterprise summary, this actually gives me a bit of an overview of the top websites users in the environment are hitting. You can see Facebook is actually the top sites, and then we can also see people trying to access LinkedIn. In terms of the departments, you can see the American sales department has been doing the most browsing, and then the EMEA VIP group behind that. And then in terms of users, Daniel Turner is my my biggest user who's been browsing, and then Mike Smith below him. If I actually come to the browse time reports, this would actually show the top users by time usage. At the moment, we've really only logged any time against my user Daniel Turner, so there's just not a whole lot of statistical data in here yet. But what I try to do before giving a demo to a customer is try to browse around with a few different users before giving your demo to the customer, so you already have a bit of data in here that will turn up in the reports. A lot of my other reports are going to be empty. We already looked at the custom reports, which, like I say, is like a log. And custom reports are extremely customizable. Pretty much anything in blue here I can click on to get a better idea or drill down deeper into the reports. If I want to find out everything Mike Smith has been using, I can actually click Mike Smith. And it gives me a breakdown on his most recent activity. Might back this up, and let's do the same for Daniel Turner. He should have a bit more data in here, and yeah, we can see he's been doing more browsing in terms of the different sites he's been accessing. So we can pull up individual reports pretty easily. If I go to File in Motion, can actually see he's downloaded files from these sites and how many files he's actually downloaded. Let's go back to my customer reports. You can also add filters to reporting data. So I can come in here and I'm going to say I want to search for detection name. I'm going to select a condition equals, and then I'm going to say FTP. And I'm going to say update. Now we can see all that FTP activity in my environment. So very easy to start to search the logs. And the custom reports are extremely customizable. If we look at the reporting options drop down here, you can see I can actually save and schedule a report. I can send a report. I can export the first page of my report, or I can export the entire report and even print the report. I'm going to just say we want to send our current report, and I can send it via email, or I can actually do a file transfer as well. I'm going to send an email to admin@example.com, and then I'll just say send. Your report has been sent. I should, if I go to my domain controller And I can open up Outlook. And I put in my user's password. And I can see the report I just sent. So I've got 13 events, and I can actually browse those events. So we can set up and schedule those reports. So pretty easy to actually come in, and you can customize and schedule a report to suit a customer's needs. So what we've been looking at so far is mainly the features and behavior when running in inline mode. Because we're in inline proxy mode, we can also demo the functionality if you do want to use the proxy. And that's what we're going to go through now. So we're going to connect to the web gateway. We're going to go to Administration Configuration. And I need to log in. And we're going to configure the web gateway proxy. So I'm going to click the proxy tab. And now I'm going to enable the HTTP HTTPS proxy. And the proxy ports we're going to use are 8080 and 8081. So I'm going to use 8080 for HTTP and then 8081 for HTTPS. And then I'm going to click Save. Okay, the system settings were changed. So now we're going to go back to my client machine. And now my client, we're gonna tell my client machine to use the proxy. Remember, the web gateway is an explicit proxy, so there's no transparent way for the client machines to know to use the proxy. So we do need to explicitly tell the client machines in the network to use the proxy. This can be automated. There are methods to do this with Active Directory or using proxy pack files, but for our demo environment we're just going to do this manually. So I'm going to tell Internet Explorer to use a proxy, and I'll go into Advanced, and we're going to say use 169.254.64.45 and 8080 for HTTP. And I'll copy that and paste that, and we're going to use 8081 for HTTPS. And then I'll say OK, OK, OK. And now my web gateway, or my client machine, should now be using the web gateway's proxy. Instead of going inline through the web gateway, we should be using the proxy to actually get out to the internet. So we can actually prove or test this. Yeah, let's go to the test webgateway.com page. We can see I have access to the internet, so this must have gone through the proxy on the web gateway. We're just going to run a quick test. I'm going to try the virus file download. And we can see the file icar.com, so the regular block page saying we're trying to download a virus. But I'm going to go back to my custom reports now on the web gateway. And I actually have a way to prove that this traffic went through the proxy. Again, if we modify the columns, we're going to change the columns that I'm viewing in the reports. And I'm going to tick the box to show me the distant port. And now if I save the settings, and let's see that distant port. So notice for all the other transactions before, or at least all the HTTP transactions, we can see they're all using port 80. But this time my client machine's using port 8080. So that actually proves that my client is indeed using the proxy. So one thing we couldn't do in older versions of the web gateway is that we weren't able to apply URL filtering to HTTPS sites. So let's come back to my client machine, and that should now be possible. I'm going to try and go to so we can see www.facebook.com. We're not allowed to go there because it's a known social networking location. But what if we try to go to secure Facebook? When I try to go to secure Facebook, we can see that I don't have access to the site, but I'm not seeing the block page. And I believe there's still a bug in the beta where the block page isn't getting sent to the end users, but this should be fixed for release time. If we come into my custom reports, we can actually see that the web gateway has actually seen the secure connection to Facebook over port 881. You can see www.facebook.com, and because of that, it's blocked access to the site. One thing worth pointing out, though, if we come back to I'm going to go to the iCar test page. So I'm going to go to www.icar.org. I'm going to try to download the anti-malware test file, and we're going to drag down. If we come down this page, we can actually see there is a secure iCar, so download area using the secure SSL enabled protocol. So if I try to download, and if I just come over here, you can see in the bottom right hand corner the URL I'm trying to access now is https://secure.icar.org/icar.com. If I try to download this file, one thing we can see is that my Symantec antivirus has actually detected iCar in the file I was trying to download, which indicates it got past the web gateway. And if we verify in the web gateway logs, you can see there's no mention of the iCar virus we just tried to download, so that did actually bypass the web gateway. So the point I'm trying to make here is that we can't do AV scanning with the standard HTTPS proxy. If you do want to do AV scanning, what we need to do is enable SSL deep inspection. So we're going to come back to the web gateway. I'm going to go to administration, configuration, and we're back on the proxy page. And this time I'm going to drag down a bit further. I'm going to enable SSL deep inspection. So SSL deep inspection is going to use SSL port 8443. So this is the port we're going to need to configure my clients to use as the HTTPS port if we're going to use deep inspection. And then I'm going to save the settings. Okay. Another thing I need to do now is I need to come into my policies and configuration. Now I need to come in and create a new policy. And the type of policy is an SSL inspection policy. And we're going to apply this to all computers. And basically what this policy says is, what type of sites will we apply the deep inspection to? Enabling deep inspection does actually add a performance hit, and there are also some sites that customers know are safe and just don't want to scan any of that traffic to or from. A good example is probably banking. For testing purposes, I'm just going to come in and I'm going to apply deep inspection. So I'm going to say intercept all categories, and the same for unclassified sites. Intercept. I'm going to save. Whoops, I need to enter my policy name. I'll call it deep inspection, and save. And now I need to save and activate my changes. One thing special about deep inspection policies, because it's a certain type of policy, SSL, it doesn't really matter, and it's the only SSL policy, it doesn't really matter where it sits in this list. If there were other deep inspection policies, which policy to apply would be determined by the precedence, and which one was highest in precedence. So I'm going to save and activate my changes. Okay. Now the next thing I need to do is actually apply a client-side certificate to my client machine. Because the web gateway is acting as a man in the middle between my client machine and the secure site the client is trying to access, I need to apply this certificate to the client machines in my environment. So to do this, again, this is probably a process you would automate, but to do this I'm going to connect to my web gateway. And I'm going to go to Administration, Configuration, and on the proxy page, under SSL Deep Inspection, you can see I'm currently using the default certificate that comes with the web gateway, and I'm going to export that to my client machine. When we do have the full version of the product, you will have the ability to apply your own certificate to the client machines. I'm going to save this to my desktop and close. And now to apply the certificate, I can just double click on it. And now we need to install this root certificate. So I'll say install and next, and that's fine, and finish. And it says you are about to install a certificate from a certificate authority claiming to represent the web gateway, and we're going to say yes, and the import was successful. Okay. So now from my client machine, what I need to do is I need to use the SSL Deep Inspection port for proxying as well. So we need to change this in my connections, LAN settings, advanced, and now instead of 8081 we want to use 8443. Okay, okay, and okay. And now I'm going to close my browser. I'm going to open it up again. Now I'm going to go to a banking site. So at the moment we should be using deep inspection for any HTTPS site. So I'm going to go to my banking site, and then I'm going to click the login button, which then redirects me to a HTTPS site. If I actually click on the lock here, I can actually see the certificate authority I'm actually using is the Symantec Web Gateway, which is what we would expect to see. What I'm now going to do, I'm actually going to close this site. Let's go back into my web gateway. We're going to edit my deep inspection policy. And I'm going to go back to banking sites. And for all finance sites, I'm actually going to set ignore all. So I'm not concerned about what my users are doing when they're using HTTPS and connecting to finance sites. And now I'm going to click Save. And save and activate my changes. And now we're going to come back to my client machine. I'm going to open up my browser again. Go back to my banking website. Try to log in. And this time we can actually see it's the VeriSign Class 3 Certificate Authority. So this actually proves that the web gateway is no longer intercepting HTTPS banking sites for SSL deep inspection. Now if I tried to go to, let's try to go to Secure Facebook again. And we can see I'm actually blocked access to this HTTPS site. Let's come back to my custom reports. And we can see that in the reports here. And the last test I want to do from the client machine now is let's test AV scanning. So we're going to go back to www.icar.org. I'm going to click the anti-malware test link. And again, we want to look for the secure iCar. It's these ones. I'm going to click the link. So this time we can actually see it's letting me save the file, but we can see my desktop antivirus hasn't done anything about it. So I saved the file to my desktop. We can see iCar here. I'm actually going to open up Notepad. And I'm going to drag iCar into Notepad. You can actually see malware has been detected by the web gateway. If I check the web gateway reports, you can actually see my user, and we found a virus, and it was blocked to secure icar.org, icar.com. So we did actually detect the virus. The one key point here is that when viruses are detected via HTTPS when SSL deep inspection is enabled, we're not able to send the patients page and block page to the end user in the same way we scan files when using HTTP. And in those situations, we actually corrupt the file that's being downloaded by the end user. So although the end user communication isn't as nice because they don't actually see that patients page, the web gateway does detect the file successfully and corrupt it, so the file isn't able to be executed. One last thing about deep inspection. If I come back to administration configuration and we look at the proxy tab, if I were looking to integrate with DLP, I'd also need to enable SSL deep inspection. If I wanted to scan outbound HTTPS for DLP violations. And the DLP settings are actually pretty straightforward. I just come in here, enable a DLP server. This uses the ICAP connection to connect to DLP Network Prevent for Web version 11. And I just put in the IP address of my DLP servers. If I have multiple servers, I can add multiple DLP servers here. And this will enforce my DLP policies. So that pretty much covers the web gateway demo that I'd normally give to a customer. Okay, well hopefully you found that useful. Here are some other tips for giving your demo. Before you actually go to deliver the demo to your customer, research your customer's current architecture and environment. Getting these details ahead of time will allow you to tailor your demo based on the customer's needs and requirements. Try not to demo features the customer might not be able to run. For instance, if a customer is only interested in running the web gateway in proxy mode and has no intention of running inline, it's probably not a good idea to be showing off features like application control. If using the web gateway VMware environment, you are going to need internet access to give the demo. If you're going to have to do this from a customer site, Make sure this isn't going to be an issue, or ask to do a remote WebEx instead. Keep in mind, you're going to need decent hardware to run the web gateway and the other images virtually. I would always suggest doing a walkthrough the day before your demo. Perform any updates on your web gateway, and make sure everything's running smoothly. In terms of next steps, Symantec employees should check out the Web Gateway document library and the Messaging and Web announcements page on SymIQ. All updated documentation and VM images can be found here. Partners should speak to their Symantec technical contact in order to get VM environment documentation, which provides details and even the Web Gateway image. The only thing we can't provide is the Windows images. This is because of licensing issues. So in summary, research a customer's architecture and environment. This will be key to help you customize your demo to fit the customer's needs. Don't forget you need internet access and decent hardware. Make sure you do your walkthrough and practice the day before your demo. Try not to forget any of these demo tips and best practices we've gone over. All of this will help you effectively deliver your demo to the customer. Thank you for completing this Symantec online course. Your feedback on the course will better help us meet your training needs. The evaluation link can be found on the left above the transcript for each presentation. This concludes this training.